This next speaker is, I don't know if you want to, we can step right up. It's one returning to the Blue Ridge stage. Rachael Wright Munn was a speaker in 2024. Rachael has wonderful talks and great delivery. I always enjoy her talks. She's also an open source contributor and a live streamer, and those are two things that you have to do in public. And for a lot of us, I think those are intimidating things to do. So she's inspiring to me in both of those ways. I've definitely felt a lot of intimidation the first time I tried to make an open source contribution. It's still intimidating. Yeah. And I've tried some live streaming. I did that like sometime in the fall for the first time. It was so hard. Oh my gosh. And it was so stressful. I love seeing people like Rachael and what she does. She's very inspiring. I think you're gonna love hearing this talk from her. It's this perfect, right at the heart of what she does. And hopefully it inspires you in your own open source work. So Rachael, thank you so much. And let's give it up for Rachael.
Yay. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Hi. And thank you so much, Jeremy, for the lovely introduction. I want to talk to all of you, and I want to see if all of you are willing to come to Hack Day. Whoops. Hang on. Hack Day. Hack Day. Hi, everyone. My name is Rachael, and I'd like you all to come to Hack Day. Hack Day! Let me see if this one works now. Excellent. Okay. You have to have it highlighted. All right. So I want you all to come to Hack Day, Saturday, right here. I think that's exciting, and I want you to contribute to an open source project of some sort. There will be multiple ones available, or you could start one of your own. So I opened my first open source PR in 2019. What I did is I was looking at a Minecraft wiki, and the image for the tool rack was actually a cow in a jar. And I replaced the image for the cow in a jar with a tool rack. And that PR never merged. And that was 7 years ago, as GitHub has so helpfully reminded me. But what I didn't know at the time was that that was a small step in a journey that has led to me actually feeling comfortable in open source, into working as an open source maintainer, is to being here with you all today having this conversation. I didn't know when I opened that PR that ever merged that I would end up opening other ones on other projects. Each and every time I picked up a new project and I opened a PR, it was just this small step, this small moment, and before I knew it, I had contributed to all of these different projects. I was taking small steps outside my comfort zone every single time until I actually felt comfortable and like I belonged in open source and like I could comfortably open issues on others' projects. Now you may be wondering, why am I up here excited and proud of doing my job for free? And this is the first misconception that I want to clear up about open source. I feel like doing my job means that I spend 8 hours of every weekday working on things that my PO thinks will make the company money, and I build it in a production grade and performant way, and that is my job. That is an obligation. That is something that I have to do in order to support my family. When I work in open source, it's not an obligation. It's a choice that I'm making. It is something that I'm choosing to do. I'm picking the projects that I work on. I'm picking the things that I do. It's about building it's about the freedom to build without obligation, out of love for your community, and with your users first and foremost, without having to compromise for profits. Now, doing this doesn't mean that there aren't tangible benefits to you from contributing to open source. First of all is new skills and experience. Inside my company, I have the collective knowledge of the people who have been in my company, and I have access to the people who are inside my company. But when I'm working with open source projects, I have the opportunity to work with Hanami. I have the opportunity to play with functional programming. If I want to learn Rust, I can work on something and have a real impact instead of building a tutorial app. I have the opportunity to actually work on real things. If you want to play with Hotwire and Reaction View, you can work on the code that Marco Roth is writing for Ruby events, and you can reference it and look at it. Those are the sort of opportunities that you have when you start to get outside of your company and into your community. Speaking of which, my favorite part about working in open source is getting to learn from experts. Now, I love these events. I love seeing you all. I love having 15 minutes in the hallway to have a conversation. How is your day? What are you doing? How are your travels? Where are you from? That is fantastic. And I genuinely mean this. I genuinely love meeting each and every one of you and learning about you. But I also really like getting an actual code review from an expert. I like having the opportunity to discuss and debate the designs, to have an actual discussion about the code that I'm writing with a person who is an expert in writing it. And I just want everyone to have the opportunity to learn from experts instead of befriending them, to have these conversations about whether or not PsychPure is the right choice for the Ruby events generators because we have the shared context of a project to discuss. Now, this last reason is the one that actually got me started in 2019, and it's the one that is perhaps the most convincing argument. Because of open source, I have a library of examples of my real work and what I'm actually capable of. I was, in 2019, going through the interview process, and they asked me for a code sample. I was going through, I'm looking at my GitHub, I have tutorial apps, I have these little side projects, things I've spent a few hours on. They didn't show what I was capable of. They didn't have the complexity to show the things that I could actually build. But more than wanting to show my capabilities or wanting to, oh, wait. I'm so sorry. We're gonna have to come back to this because I'm actually reading example 4. So we're gonna hop around here real quick. I realized my best code was locked in other people's private repositories, and that was heartbreaking to me, more so than anything else. Going back. Thank you. I appreciate that. If you want to submit a PR, contributions welcome. Right to repair is another cool thing about open source. I don't know about you, but if I've ever run into an issue inside of a tool, a bug or something like that, I've often had this little voice that's screaming inside my head, if you would just let me at the code, I could get in there and fix it myself. And that is a statement of frustration when we're working with SaaS tools, but in open source, it's one of empowerment and capability. And I want to provide an example of this. So this is a recent PR that I added to Geocoder. So in Ruby events, we use Google Street Maps and we use nominatim in order to geocode our results. And there is this street address method on the Google Street Results one that isn't available in nominatim. And what I want to point out is that this is not a particularly complicated change, nor is it an impressive PR. I wrote this in a fit of frustration because I didn't have access to this method. And it's not, again, complicated at all. It's literally 3 lines, and I copied those from Google Street Results. And this would be an easy thing for me to fix locally, right? Like I could check the type of the response, I could pull these 3 values and I could put them together. Or I could monkey patch it if I wanted to get really fancy. Or I can fix it in the right place. I can fix it in Geocoder. I can fix it for every single person who uses Geocoder. I am getting a ton of value out of Geocoder. And part of the reason for that is the 383 contributors who have come before me and helped to improve and fix that tool. Open source, in my mind, is about collective action. It's the right to repair your tools, but it's also the responsibility to fix things in the right place, to upstream our monkey patches, and to share the burden of maintaining a project. Now, I'm trying to convince you, but most people that I talk to want to contribute to open source, but they don't. Open source is intimidating. Jeremy acknowledged this. It's vulnerable to put your code out in public and have a stranger review it. It's hard to know where to begin. There are so many projects and so many issues, and it's hard to get started. And I said that my journey in open source started with a series of small steps, but this first one is really big. I think there are some key barriers to open source between somebody who is a great engineer in their company and somebody who is a great open source contributor. I think one of them is finding the issues. I think one of them is working with forked repositories. That's a pattern that we're not familiar with. And I think that the biggest one and the hardest one for people is the dreaded review cycle. And what we're going to do is we're going to discuss and go through all of these today, starting with that first one, finding an issue. Now, when you first start showing interest in open source, what most people will tell you to do is they'll say, hey, I think you should go find a good first issue. Maintainers will actually go through their projects and they will tag items that they think are good first issues that are small in scope and easier for contributors to work on. And there are even sites that aggregate these. Good first issues, goodfirstissues.com, a whole bunch of different variations. And this is the advice most people are going to give you. But I think that this is the wrong approach. Dev environment setup is hard. Learning a new code base is hard. And when you're hopping from good first issue to good first issue, you're repeating these steps over and over and over again. So instead, what I think you should do is I think you should find a good first repository. Now, these are the things that I look for when I'm working on a new project. I want something that I'm interested in. So what drew me to Ruby for Good was the fact that it's a charitable project. What drew me to Ruby Events was the mission for it. What drew me to Rails is that it's a tool that I use. What drew me to Geocoder is that it had a method that I really wanted it to have and it didn't. There are all sorts of things that can draw your interest and bring you to a project, but I do think that's important. The next one is PR review turnaround. So I strongly recommend looking at some of the closed PRs and some of the open ones. See what that communication cycle is like between the contributor and the maintainer. I think a lot of friction in open source comes from contributors having expectations that maintainers cannot keep up with. And so having those expectations set and finding a project that can meet them, because there are a lot of different projects out there and they all have different review cycles, this can really help. Next is Docker or a dev container setup. So I told you before that dev environment setup is hard. Having that Dockerized environment can make it a lot easier for you to get up and started. Next is a friend. When I started with Ruby events, I had Marco there. The whole reason I contributed to Vernier is because I ran into John in the coffee line and I went over and joined him for a hack day. The only reason I felt comfortable contributing to Rails for the first time was that I had Matthew. Having a friend, meeting someone at a hack day like these, knowing the maintainer, this can be an incredible way to work on that first PR and really get comfortable with open source. The next one is stack experience, at least for your first one. I recommend having experience with the stack and knowing more about it because you're going to be learning a lot about working with the maintainer and forked repositories and other things like that. And the last and perhaps most important one is clear issues. So a good first issue is going to be small in scope, well-defined, and reproducible. You want it to be reproducible, so you know it's done. You want it to be well-defined, so if you have a UI issue and it doesn't have an actual spec associated with it, you're probably going to end up with some back and forth on what it should actually look like. And you want it to be small in scope. For your first one, just add a button, change the color of a link, make a small change, add a 3-line method. Do your heroic one as your second PR once you're more familiar with the code base. You're already going through the dev environment setup. I think that this good first issue is critical to your success. So what I want to do next is I'm going to go through some common categories of issues that I see, and I'm going to talk about how mergeable they are as a category. So we're going to talk about setup changes and unrequested refactors as some of the most difficult types to get merged. Now, setup changes are some of the ones that you run into while you're setting up the project. So naturally, you think, well, this isn't Dockerized yet. I'll Dockerize it, right? But the thing is that in order to test your dev environment setup, the maintainer essentially has to blow away their entire version and their entire dev setup in order to go through and test that yours works. In addition, once you are gone, they then have to maintain that setup in the way that you've changed it through different Ruby versions, through different databases, through all sorts of different changes that they may be making to the project itself. So what you need to do is you need to make sure before you do any sort of major setup change that you have maintainer buy-in. In order to do that, you should really open an issue before you try and attempt any of these. For unrequested refactors, you may look at the code and you may think, this isn't how I would do it, this isn't how I like it, so I'm going to go in and I'm going to refactor it. Code aesthetics are a very personal choice. Trying to ensure that the code base is consistent is its own challenge. But even if the maintainer likes the refactor that you have done, you have changed code in a lot of different places. You have created merge conflicts for other contributors who are trying to work in that same space. And ultimately, the user has no new functionality. There's just your refactor. So these are some of the hardest types of issues to get merged. Next, we're going to talk about some challenging and rewarding ones. So for new features, you really need to make a case for why this is something that should exist in the project, why it's within the scope of the project, why it belongs, and why it should be there. The reason being that once you have added this feature, anything that comes out of it, anything that the users want associated with it, any refactors that need to happen, any bugs that happen, anything that comes out of this new feature is going to be the maintainer's responsibility to resolve. So you need to make an argument for why this belongs and why it fits in with the project and why it's needed. The next one is documentation. This one is very different from the other three that I've placed so far. So the other three I've described, the maintainer is kind of an obstacle here where they're protecting the project, but documentation is always welcome. It helps users, it helps contributors and maintainers. But what I want to acknowledge is how incredibly challenging it is to write documentation. When you look at a method and you're trying to document it, by its very definition, that method is undocumented, which means you're looking at the places that it's called and you're looking at the places calling it, and you're trying to figure out based on that what the purpose and what the meaning of that method is. Because documentation is more than just describing the parameters. It's about trying to explain why and how this is used. And the thing is that even once you have that understanding and you've built it purely from reading the code, what you then have to do is write it in such a way that it is concise for somebody who is familiar with the project, so it is complete for somebody who is new to the project, and so it's clear to somebody who speaks English as a second language. That is an inherently difficult task, and I think when we tell first-time contributors that they should get started with documentation, we're saying that because maintainers want it and they want to merge it, and we're not recognizing the inherent difficulty in that task. Now, our last one is the ones that are a lot easier and often welcome, and this is probably the category for your first contribution that you should be looking at. So existing issues, with this one you kind of have a buddy. Somebody else has created the issue, they've written it, they could potentially review it, they could be looking at it. You could even pair with them if you wanted to. This is helpful. One of the things that I do look for with existing issues is I look for some form of the maintainer's blessing on it, either like emojis or a comment, or that they have submitted it themselves so that I can make sure that this is an issue that they actually want resolved. Another one that's incredibly helpful is extending existing patterns. So if the maintainer has built out this pattern, you can go through and you can extend it. And to me, this is one of the great powers of open source, is because you are able to kind of extend this existing pattern. So for example, when I added the comparison validator to Rails, I was able to look at examples from the numericality validator and from other validators in order to figure out how to do it. When I added Twitch clips to 4M, I was able to look at examples from the Vimeo and YouTube tags. These are real features, they're valuable, the value statement has already been proven in the app, and I as a contributor am able to extend the capabilities of the project. Now, the last one are ones tagged good first issue, which we've talked about before. These are really good. They're the gold standard in open source contributing. Lately, what I've been seeing is when I tag something good first issue, it's gone in under 24 hours. And one of the reasons for that is partially those aggregation sites for things tagged good first issues. But if you can find one of these, it is a fantastic first choice. There's something that I'm kind of there's this underlying pattern when I'm talking about what it is that makes something easy to merge or difficult to merge. And the idea is that maintainers live with the code that you deliver. So you as a contributor have come by, you've made this change, you've contributed it, but then it's the maintainer who actually lives with it and continues to work with and evolve it. And this can be a little bit challenging because as a contributor, you may feel like you don't know what their expectations are, this stranger you've never met who's living with the code that you've created. But I think that if we start to look at the different roles of maintainers and contributors, some of those understandings kind of like and what maintainer expectations are a little bit easier to understand. So maintainers, they have access to the original repo. They're responsible for merging PR, releasing new versions, deploying to prod. They set the direction for the project, and they're focused on the project's needs. And then they do everything a contributor does. A contributor often has access to the forked repo, and we're going to get into forked repos as well. They can create issues, they can create PRs, they can also review PRs. So you may, as a contributor, go in and help review others' PRs. You may be reviewed by a contributor, so keep an eye out for that as well. But largely, as a contributor, you're focused on your personal needs and what you're looking for out of the project. And I find that as a maintainer, I'm often sitting there and I'm thinking about everything, right? I'm thinking about users, I'm thinking about my contributors and the contributor profiles, I'm thinking about my other maintainers, I'm thinking about the future of the project and its maintainability, and it gets really heavy sometimes. Meanwhile, as a contributor, I largely skip through other people's repositories, dropping off little gifts and presents and just enjoying myself and having a lovely little adventure. So you might wonder if the choice is adventurous fairy dropping off open source presents and heavy weight of responsibility, why someone would choose to maintain a project. And I think it really boils down to these are the three main reasons I've heard when I talk to people. You want it to exist. So for example, Jeremy recently worked on a typesense search for Claude. He wants it to exist. Next, you want to share what you've built. Oftentimes when we're working for companies, we want to share the things that we've built so other people can use and extend it. Or you want help building it. And this is the largest one that I see. All of these 3 points really boil down to one central concept, which is that maintainers care about their project, and they care about it deeply. And when you make a contribution, you are contributing to the success of the project they care about. Maintainers really want you there, and they care about you. And there are a lot of things that get involved with that. There's ego and workload and real life and all sorts of things that get involved. But at its very root, maintainers want you there because you are part of the success of that project. And that's why maintainers have written you a letter inviting you to their project. That is the contributing.md. This is a letter inviting you to the project. They have written down everything that you can't be expected to know when you first look at a code base in a guide so that you know what's going on. For the large, busy repos like Forem and like Rails, this is often a whole website. Sometimes for much smaller ones, it's just a section in the README. But this is where you'll find style guidelines, documentations, how to request review, claim an issue, how to run tests, and how to do your developer setup. And if you're a maintainer, now would be a good time to take a look at this list and check to make sure that all of these are in your contributing.md. I know that's something that I worry about as well and that I probably need. So now that we've kind of read through the contributing.md, it's time to move on to the next phase of this, which is forked repositories. And I want to pause a minute and kind of talk about this. So in your work projects, what you probably do is you request access to the repo, you provide your username, and then they add you to the organization, and at that point you can create branches on the repository. This is way too much work for somebody to do to an open source project, and it's way too much overhead in order to bring contributors in. So instead, what we do is we have forked repositories. In addition, if you have access to branches, you have access to running CI, so you could throw, cryptocurrency miners or copyrighted material, and then they would be responsible for that, which is, again, why we use forked repositories, which is kind of a new pattern if you're working in open source. So when you're looking at the upstream, that's going to be the original repo. What you're going to do is you're going to go to that upstream repo, and then you're going to fork it. And this is going to create a copy on your user of that project. And that's going to be called the forked copy in origin. The origin is where your branch is going to live. It's where your changes in local dev are going to live. It's where you're going to get pushed to, and it's where you're going to get cloned from. All of this is happening because it's where your changes live, but then the upstream is where everybody else is. So that's where you're going to want to make your PR. If you make your PR on the forked copy, nobody else will see it. My very first PR was on my forked copy, and nobody else could see it. My second PR was on the upstream, still didn't merge. Then that's where others' changes are. That's where you can get pull from, get fetch from, and you can also do a get remote add upstream, and that allows you to do a get fetch upstream to pull all those changes in. Now that we're starting to talk about the PR, let's talk about giving your PR the best chance for success. So first of all, you want to give it a clear description. So I talked earlier about the purpose, the feature, the why. You want to make sure that that's in there. Next, you want to make it small and single purpose. So if you give me like a one-line PR and CI passes, I can merge that from my phone. If it's 3 to 5 files, I'm probably waiting until my lunch break, and it's going to take like 15 minutes. If you give me a 30-plus file PR, it's going to be around the heat death of the universe. I'd like to do it before then. I really care about you. I care about your contribution. It's not going on the priority list until the heat death of the universe. You want to make sure tests and linting pass. So when I'm looking at my full list of PRs to potentially merge and review, the first thing I do is I'm looking for mergeable ones. So I filter out all of the ones that have failing CI, failing tests, and I focus on the ones that are passing. You want to make sure it's easy to test and reproduce so I know what I'm doing and the changes that I'm making. And you want to give maintainers a really quick response. So my first time contributing to Rails, Rachael asked me to change the variable name in one of the tests. And I pushed back and I went, hey, are you sure? Because I based it on this and that. And it sat there for 3 more months. So when you see that maintainer response, like if you want to improve the chances that your PR merges, respond quickly, make sure it's still ahead of their mind, and just like kind of do the thing. It's their project. They're going to live with the code. Do the thing. All right, let's go through all of our steps because that was a lot. That was a lot. First, we're going to find a repo. Then, we're going to find an issue. We're going to read the contributing.md that invites us to the project. We're going to fork the repo. We're going to get clone it. We're going to set up our dev environment. And next, we're going to reproduce the issue. These issues are just made by like random people, by the way. You really do need to reproduce it and make sure it's valid. Then you code, document, or translate. Now, this is the part I am most confident in. I showed you the geocoder PR. There's really nothing special about open source contributions outside of anything else. The conversations are great, but I am fully confident in your ability to code, document, or translate. And then your last step is to create the PR and point it to the original repo. If you have followed all of these steps, then congratulations! You have created a PR! Yay! I'm so proud of you! Just creating the PR is worth the effort. At this point, you have experience with a new project. You have looked at it, you have investigated, you have learned something, you have grown, you have taken a tiny step. And that's good. That's really important because there are a lot of reasons that your PR might go unmerged after this point. Yeah. First of all, they could have 40 other PRs to review. They could be on vacation. They could be at a lovely event like this one. They could have a big work project. They could have found it hard to read or follow your PR. Those 30-plus file PRs, yeah, he's the universe. They could be figuring out how to say no. I care about you and I want you as part of my project. That means it's really hard for me to tell you that something that you want is out of scope for this project. There could be future work happening there, a big refactor that you don't know about, and your work could intersect with it. There are a lot of reasons that your PR may go unmerged, and some of them have to do with your PR, and some of them have nothing to do with it. But here's what I want you to think about. Each PR, merged or not, is a little step in your own growth. So my first PR, as I mentioned, was to a Minecraft mod. And it didn't merge. But what that taught me about was forked repositories. So when Hacktoberfest came around, I felt really comfortable and confident working on 4M and adding Twitch clips. Their Twitch clips, by the way, are embedded with liquid tags. So when that happened, I learned about liquid tags. And when I started a Jekyll site, I found out they used liquid tags. And I found out that you could gem a liquid tag. So I made Jekyll Twitch. And now I know how to build a gem. I now live in a place where I build a gem because of a PR that never merged. I started with Hunters Keepers, and I decided I wanted it to be Dockerized. And then I worked on Meet Another Day, and I decided that I wanted it to be in a dev container. And then I wanted to work on Ruby events, so I put it in a dev container. And then I wanted to work on lobsters, so I put it on a dev container. And that one put a lot of pushback. Peter had a lot of questions about how and what and why dev containers were. And then I realized that I had Dockerized and dev containered 3 different Rails apps. And if you think about it, in your company, one person gets to Dockerize the app, one person gets to dev container it. You really don't get the chance to have 3 different projects with different databases and different structures and Dockerize them. So I realized I had become kind of proficient in Docker. And that's the reason that I gave a talk about Docker and dev containers for Rubyists at Tropical on Rails for 700 people. Because I decided to Dockerize my first app, and because I decided to dev container all these other ones, I'm now an international speaker. So, I mentioned Meet Another Day. In this project, it is my own project, my side project. I had a few contributors, right? So I learned a lot about working with contributors and maintaining an open source project. Had a small handful of people. I learned about writing good issues. I learned about talking to them. I went over to Ruby events, and I opened up 13 PRs. I learned a lot about how Ruby events worked. And then in December, Marco Roth invited me to become a maintainer on Ruby events itself. Now, I'm part of a team for a project that had 102 opened and 97 merged PRs in March, which is larger than the lifetime of Meet Another Day. So I find myself, and the other thing that I'm learning is how on earth I'm going to balance maintenance with the other obligations of my life. But I took these little steps, and I find myself in a position where I can make a gem. I can speak at conferences. I'm a maintainer of a project, and I don't know what the next little step is. I didn't know when I took the first one where I was going to end up, and I find that really exciting. But there's a more exciting question for me standing up here today, which is, what is the next little step for you? What are you going to do? And I don't know, but it's really exciting, and I want you to come to Hack Day, and I want you to find out. I don't care what project you work on. It can be anything. I just want you to build within something. You can build with me on Ruby events. I'm happy to be your first maintainer. But let's find out what you build. Thank you.
Rachel, thank you so much. That was amazing. I don't know about you, but as I was listening to her talk, I just realized, like, if you zoom out, that's so much of that was just great life advice or great, like, professional growth. Like, so much of that, like, how to contribute, how to work with people. Like, man, that was great. Thank you. Before you go step down, is it a special day for you?
Oh, you know, it might be. It's the day the Ruby Events newsletter comes out.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Is there another special day for me that I have forgotten because of the Ruby Events newsletter, Jeremy?
It is? I really thought, is it? Okay. Okay, all right. Well, in that case, can somebody help me with this lighter? David, thank you. Right.
I really threw you for a loop there. I'm sorry.
You did? Oh my gosh. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna eat this cupcake myself. It is Rachel's birthday today. She's speaking on her birthday. So
I'm so happy.
We have a cupcake. David, thank you so much. Let's sing to Rachel. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday birthday to you. Symbolic blow. All right. Thank you. Thank you for speaking on your birthday.
Thank you all so much. I'm so happy I get to celebrate my birthday with all my friends in the Ruby community.
Yay.